Hello my friends, welcome back to this series of videos I'm making on the folklore and symbolism of various trees and plants of Britain, Ireland and Northern Europe. So today, something a bit darker, a tree of secrets and dark magic. That's right, the blackthorn. Here she is. So I'm going to talk a bit about this tree or bush, a bit about some of its practical uses and applications and its history, then a little bit into its use in the history of magic and also folklore and beliefs and superstitions surrounding this tree. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Ogham, the Druidic, so-called Druidic or Celtic tree alphabet known as Ogham or Ogham, where this tree, blackthorn, is represented by the Straif letter here, the 14th letter of the Ogham. And also I'm going to talk a little bit about the runes as well, because this tree can also be represented in the Germanic Runic script. And then to finish off, I'm going to tell a little story that sort of encapsulates some of the things I've been talking about. As always, my friends, if you're new to this channel and like content on folklore and mythology and storytelling in the oral tradition, as well as tree and plant lore and things like that, then why not hit that like button and subscribe, and you will get more content. So, the blackthorn then. This is a very, very spiky tree. It's called the blackthorn because of these really long thorns that grow on it. Also, when the tree is much larger, it's got very, very black bark to it. It looks very striking in the very, very early spring when the first flowers appear on this tree, white flowers on a black bough. It's usually the very, very first tree to come into blossom. Usually when this tree flowers in winter, it's called a blackthorn winter, and it's a sign that it's going to be very, very cold. So a tree of winter. Again, more on that later. What this tree is most famous for, of course, is sloes. This is the ancestor to the plum or the damson, the cultivated variety that is, and they are very, very astringent, but you can make sloe gin out of these. You can see somewhere else on YouTube where to make sloe gin. I'm sure there's loads of places, but essentially you just prick each sloe, put it in a bottle and pour gin or vodka over the top. It's ready by Christmas. It has very good healing medicinal properties. Both the berry and the flower can be a very good purgative, purge you of ailments. Again, this will become relevant in the symbology of the tree. This tree has had a relationship with humans for a very, very long time. I'm on a very, very old farm here, and right here in front of me there is a blackthorn hedge that is completely taken over and made an absolutely impenetrable thicket. So we've seen evidence since the Neolithic time, so a very, very long time ago, thousands of years ago, of this tree being used as a barrier, usually to keep livestock in and or wild animals out. Often a ring is made around an ancient community. Outside is wild, inside is where civilization lives, where order is, where cosmos is, right? So it's not just a practical barrier, it's a spiritual and symbolic and religious one as well. Again, this is going to be important with the symbology of this tree as a barrier, as a dividing line, as a this is our realm, out there is your realm, and I'll spike anyone who disagrees with me. So that's sort of what this tree is about. Since the Neolithic time as well, the Celts, our Celtic ancestors, used this tree in defensive fortifications. In the Roman records of the Roman assault on the Druids on Anglesey in North Wales, they apparently had to get through a huge mazes, labyrinths of blackthorn, what with ramparts and ditches and palisade walls as well with stakes. It's a very effective barrier. Not even a dog can worm its way through a very thick blackthorn hedge. Why this also is not something you'd want to do, try and get through a blackthorn hedge, is because these spikes are sort of hollow and have a lot of bacteria in and can turn septic, I should say. So I've been clearing this hedge for many, many, many years, bits of it here and there as part of maintenance of this farm, and I've had on more than one occasion, one of these thorns goes straight through a glove into my knuckle, and my hand's gone septic and infected, and I've had to take antibiotics because my finger's swollen right up like a balloon. And I don't normally like taking antibiotics. I think we should all take less of them in the world for the sake of all of us, but I had to on this occasion. And if this had happened to one of our ancestors before antibiotics and modern medications, that would probably mean game over. So that's a nice segue in a way to the symbolism of this tree, which is in many ways a tree of death, a tree of injury, a tree of harm, doing harm to someone. It's got some quite negative aspects, this tree, but some positives as well, because as we all know, inside every negative thing is a little grain of the positive as well, and vice versa. This tree, if you got spiked by it in days gone by, it could mean the end of your life. This could be why in folk magic, in European but particularly English or British, I should say, folk magic down in the West Country, which is where I live, and up in Scotland and numerous other places, these thorns would be used in witchcraft, in black magic, to stick into a doll. You might think of a voodoo doll, a doll which you stick pins into to make the victim suffer in the associated area. It's called sympathetic magic because the doll is acting in sympathy with the victim. Normally you have to get a bit of hair or a toenail or some spit or saliva or urine or semen or something from the subject, and you need to put that on the doll so it can be associated with that person, and then you stab it with blackthorn needles. This is possibly still is a very common practice in European witchcraft, in black magic. It's called sympathetic magic. It's got nothing to do with voodoo as well. When we think of voodoo dolls, it's got nothing to do with the West African religion of voodoo. We just called them voodoo dolls during the colonial era to make it bad. This tree is also, in magic, often used for hexing. As I've already said, any kind of hexing or cursing you might do with a blackthorn staff or wand because of its very negative connotations. Up until quite recently, in the Celtic fringes of Britain, particularly down in Devon and Cornwall, witches and warlocks, cunning folk, would use a staff made of blackthorn. So if you're going to do that kind of magic, the bad kind, blackthorn is the tree for you. There was, I think, one of the very last people to be executed for witchcraft was a warlock in Scotland in, I think, the 1800s, who was putting hexes on people's cattle, making them, give birth stillborn, and they killed him, obviously, but also burned his blackthorn staff because that was the source of his dark powers. And it also, in the sort of medieval era, becomes increasingly associated with Satan as well. Ah! Ah! Fitting that a crow flies over then. Sometimes it's said in folk superstition about the devil that if you want to make a deal with the devil, or make a deal with the devil, he comes and pricks you with a blackthorn spike to seal the deal, as it were. This tree is also very strongly associated with fairies, with the fairy folk, but usually a slightly more malicious kind of fairy. You might say more like a goblin or a kind of a demon or evil spirit. In Ireland, these are called the Lunan Shi, which literally means, that pronunciation probably wasn't correct, but sort of a moon fairy. So they're associated with the moon. It's around full moon now, so this is probably a very, very active time for this plant. I've been quite careful picking it. So a tree of dark magic, a tree of doing injury, but also on the flip side of that, a tree of protection, a tree of defense, a tree of putting up a barrier, a tree of forcing away evil as well as administering harm. So the reverse is often true with folkloric and symbolic associations. All right. Can also be a tree of healing as well as a tree of injury. In the Ogham, the so-called Druidic tree alphabet, or the Celtic tree alphabet, it's a sort of Welsh and Irish set of symbology, but also letters, which represent the various trees. So this is the 14th letter of the Ogham alphabet, Straif or Straif or Straif. It's etymologically connected to the English word strife. So again, a tree that has been related to suffering, to hardship for a very, very, very long time. And we can see why. I, from personal experience, know why. But yeah, in the Ogham, again, it's used for self-defense. It's also one of the kennings for this tree in the Ogham is keeper of secrets, or keeper of dark secrets. Again, I think that's connected to the historic defensive capabilities of this tree, both for human communities, but also for animals. You know, in a positive sense, this is where birds come to nest to escape predators. Okay, this is very useful in ecology, this tree, because it's very good for rewilding. This is a sort of rewilding farm here, and the reason we've allowed this hedge to kind of subsist is because there are young ash and elm and oak trees growing up in it, safe from the deer that would otherwise nibble on the leaves. So even today, there's a protective connotation about this tree that is also apparent in the Ogham. Yeah, so a tree of secrets, and a tree of protection, but also a tree of causing harm. It's also a tree of purging. If there's something you need to deal with in your life, you can purge that. You can bring it out in the open. I'll talk about that in a minute. First, though, this is one of the few trees that also has a association, arguably, in the Germanic Runic system, as well as the Ogham. So this is, you might know this, the thorn rune. I think we call this Thurisaz in the Elder Fuduk. So this is the thorn rune. It is also the rune of giants. It also means just an unpleasant thing, like a thorn, or like a giant, or troll, or goblin, or like an illness. It's kind of a similar thing, because, as I've said before on this channel, in the worldview of our ancestors and many animistic cultures, even to this day, if you've got an illness or something, that's caused by an invisible, unpleasant entity, and that's what this stands for. But this is also, as you may know, the rune of Thor, the thunder god, and also his hammer. And Thor is the one who smashes giants and fights trolls, and he's got his hammer, the crusher, Mjolnir, that just destroys any adversity, be it goblin or orc or troll or frost giant, whatever it is. So again, this is a tree of nasty things, but also the cure, the remover of nasty things. So again, there's that double meaning going on here with this rune, the thorn rune. And I just find it really interesting to see how different systems of symbology, separated by kind of time and distance, both correspond with each other sometimes, but also with the folklore in the oral tradition, and also just practical wisdom as well. It all segues together. Also psychologically. So this is a tree you're supposed to be very, very, very careful with. The other day when I was cutting this Ogham stave, I wasn't maybe as conscious and respectful as I usually am when taking these Ogham staves and taking a tree down generally. Regardless of your metaphysics and your thoughts about animism and whether or not trees have spirits or conscious entities that dwell within them, regardless of that, psychologically, I just think it's always good to foster an attitude of respect towards the natural world. It's good for us and good for the planet. Anyway, that was not the case when I was cutting this branch a few days ago, and I took this branch into my home, and some weird shit has been happening to me the last few days. Like some old wounds have been coming up, a lot of anger, a lot of just psychological stuff. But I've got it out and dealt with it. Dragged those goblins out of the long black bag we pulled behind us, all of us, and then they scampered off. So what I'm trying to say is, within this negative aspect of bringing up bad energies, bad memories, bad experiences, we can also then purge and deal with them. And again, that relates to one of the medicinal uses of this plant as a purgative. So really interesting how this all segues together, both personal experience, folklore, magic, and biology. This tree is also, it's often associated with this time of year. We've just had the autumn equinox, so it's harvest time, I guess because the sloes are out, but it's also mainly associated with Samhain or Halloween. And this tree is perhaps more than any other tree associated with the spirit of winter, which in some parts of Celtic Britain and Ireland is called the Cailleach, the Crone, the old one, the queen or spirit of winter. So this tree rules, as does the Cailleach, the dark half of the year, which goes from Samhain to Beltane. So this is interesting again because it ties into a theme that I talk about a lot, the triple aspect of the sacred feminine and this sort of resurrecting deity motif that has its variations in different parts of Europe and the world. The Celtic version, in some parts of the Celtic speaking world anyway, is the Cailleach, who starts off in some versions as the bride, the virgin Bridget, St. Bridget, if you like, who sort of emerges in around Imbola, the first beginnings of spring. She then grows into a kind of harvest mother, a mother goddess, the divine sacred mother, and then when harvest is past, it's the time of the crone now, and the crone rules winter, and then eventually she dies and becomes the virgin again in this endless cycle that we're all going through all of our lives, single or many. The point here is the Cailleach is not a negative creature or deity or spirit, although she may appear like it. The harshness of winter has its lessons for us. So that is maybe the main lesson we can take from the Blackthorn, that when we get stabbed or when something bad happens to us, good can come of it, because the seed of light, hope, new spring, the new white flowers are there under the bark waiting to come out. So any hardship we experience in our lives, we can turn that lesson, that cruel lesson of winter, into summer and spring flowers. And of course the Cailleach, she has a staff which she strikes the ground with, and frost spreads across the land, creating winter. And her staff, of course, is made of blackthorn. Thank you very much for watching, my friends. I'm just going to finish with a little story. Just before I do, though, if you want to support me financially, if you have the means, you can follow me on Patreon. You can follow me for as little as $3 a month, but if you pay a bit more, I will send you a wooden item. It may be a spoon like this one, or it may be a Ogham stick like this one I've made here, or like this one made of apple wood, which is on its way to Josiah. Thank you very much, Josiah, for being one of my new Raven tier supporters. So this Ogham stave is on its way to you, courtesy of Old Man Apple Tree. I probably won't send these to the USA because the Puritans in the US Customs Office tend to put them through the shredder. Moving on. This is a story that resonates with a few of the things I've been talking about the Blackthorn Tree. So, once upon a time, there was a farmer somewhere near here in the West Country. Now, every other farmer, and in this own farmer's own labourers, said of this particular farmer, he's only in it for the money. He doesn't care about the land. It's not a symbiotic give and take relationship for him. He just wants to intensively farm and get as much profit out of the ground as he possibly can. My friends, I know a few farmers in the surrounding area that are a bit like that. Luckily, I know a lot of farmers who are not. Anyway, this farmer, he had one particular field that was good. It was a good productive field, you know, but right in the middle of it, there was growing this huge blackthorn tree with black bark, and in the spring it would be white with flower, and at this time of year in harvest it would be filled with sloes, and all his men would pick the sloes for their for their pot at home, obviously without the farmer watching, of course. Now, this farmer was starting to get very, very irritated with this blackthorn tree because it, as far as he was concerned, served no purpose, and he couldn't plough or sow the bit of land immediately under it, and he couldn't get near it because it would graze him, and it just irritated him. And one day he decided, right, the day has come, I'm going to cut down that blackthorn tree. So he went to his men and said, right, you cut it down. But there was a stony silence. None of them moved or said a word. And they said, what, are you deaf, you idiots? Come on, I said cut down that tree. Well, why not, he said. And then finally one of them piped up, because, sir, it's inhabited by fairies. Yeah, fairies. The moon fairies live under that, and I hear say there's gold buried underneath it. And if you take the gold, the fairies will be very, very, very displeased. Bah! Said the farmer. Ridiculous, you superstitious nitwits. Go, I'm telling you, I'm ordering you to cut down that tree. But not a man budged. Fine, right, said the farmer. I'll do it myself. And he picked up his axe and went to that tree, and a long, long time it took him to cut that tree down. He got many cuts and grazes from the thorns, but eventually that big, beautiful black-limbed tree was in a tangled heap on the field. This particularly resonates with me, this story, because just today vandals have cut down a very, very beautiful tree on Hadrian's Wall in northern England. And this also happened to the Glastonbury thorn tree a few years ago. So I don't know why people, landowners, vandals, religious extremists keep wanting to cut down our big, beautiful, sacred trees. But some people, eh? So this farmer had cut down the tree, and there it lay. And for good measure, he dug up the ground underneath it to look for the gold. But there was no gold there. And he said, load of old rubbish. See, no fairies, no gold, load of old rubbish. And he turned around and saw smoke rising from the horizon. It was his own farmhouse, and all the barns and all the grain going up in smoke. And it was as if he could hear on the breeze, in the rustling leaves of that tree that had fallen on the ground, load of rubbish, load of rubbish. Load of nonsense, load of nonsense. And that farmer died, a poor, poor man. So, be kind to our trees, my friends. If you want to hear more stories about trees, I will play one in the next video.